foreign policy issues and the world at large. He said US will engage with the world to meet tomorrow's challenges by the power of our example. He says the US role in the world will be, there will be greater focus on the US role in the world, and we will face crises all at once. It's time for boldness, he said.
Nina, can you hear us?
I'm afraid we've lost that link with Nina Maria Paus in Washington, D.C., Munmun, but
yes,
we'll try to fix that link with her in just a bit. But to sort of, throw some more light on that point that Nina Maria Paus was making an intervention there, Munmun. The focus was clearly on domestic issues, on racism, on unity, on democracy. And it was an emotionally charged speech because we know where he was coming from and the crises that is facing America as we speak. But clearly, he has set the roadmap for his administration over the next 4 years, clearly pinpointing the challenges and the roadmap ahead for his government, isn't it?
Absolutely. He's laid out the agenda, set the tone and tenor at the very beginning of his administration. And he will be hitting the ground running as well.
Absolutely.
Remember that, because several executive orders will be issued by him at the very start of his presidency. But going back to some of the key takeaways of his inaugural address as the President of the US, he said that, hear me out, and if you still do not agree with me, then that is democracy. I will be the President for all Americans. He also said that democracy has prevailed and that we still have far to go, much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, and much to build and gain. He said, I ask every American to join me in the cause of unity. He said we can overcome the deadly virus, we can rebuild the middle class, we can deliver racial justice, make US the leading force in the world to lead the world if we come together. Because unity, he said, is the path forward. If we unite, we won't fail. We must reject the culture of manipulating and manufacturing facts.
Absolutely.
Like you said, we know where this is coming from.
Indeed. So clearly he's setting a clear roadmap for his government over the next 4 years. Focus will be on domestic issues, in tackling the COVID pandemic, in reviving the economy, in administering the climate change issue, and also focusing clearly on racial equity, one of his top priorities going forward as well. So all in all, a very emotionally charged, forward-looking speech, at the same time reminding the Americans of where the country was coming from just over a fortnight ago when the pro-Trump supporters actually stormed the very venue of his swearing-in on the west front of the Capitol Hill.
Absolutely. He referred to the COVID-19 pandemic as well, which is going to be one of his topmost priorities, Team Biden has said. He said that we need to set aside politics and face the pandemic as one nation. This can also be seen as an appeal to Republicans so that there is bipartisan support and consensus in both houses of the US Congress, in the Senate as well as in House of Representatives, for the passage of the economic relief bill that Biden is piloting, because that has a lot of components with regard to tackling the pandemic.
Indeed.
And I understand,
and I'm told Nina Maria Paus is back with us. Nina, if you can hear us. Looking ahead now at the first 100 days of the Biden administration, could you walk our viewers through the, the main agenda, is the first order of business for Biden in the first 100 days of his administration?
Well, we can certainly talk about the first 100 days, but I think we should also talk about the next 24 hours. We're expecting a rush of executive orders from President Biden, basically overturning some key moves by President Trump, especially on the coronavirus pandemic, on immigration and on climate change. It's widely known that President Biden intends to honor his pledge of rejoining the WHO and sending a strong signal on treaties, multilateral treaties like the Paris Climate Agreement, and also honoring America's contribution to vaccines on this question of vaccine inequity. America under President Trump over the last year or so has been perceived to have been very focused on its own pandemic and its own interests. So I think we can see or expect to see a flurry of activity. One of the key issues for some of the priorities that the Biden administration has laid out, and you're right to mention the COVID-19 stimulus package. One of the key issues is trying to keep Congress focused on the Biden agenda, which may or may not be difficult if an impeachment trial, a second impeachment trial, gets underway. We're expecting Nancy Pelosi to send articles of impeachment to the Senate, perhaps as early as tomorrow or Friday, at which point it triggers action within 24 hours following those articles of impeachment. There's been a lot of debate within the Biden administration and among Democrats. Some Democrats are extremely worried that it's going to be very difficult to get Congress to focus on some of Joe Biden's legislative priorities, and some suggestion that they could deal with the impeachment trial proceedings in the morning and then in the afternoon get to work on some of his priorities. So it's going to be a tricky balancing act. I think Joe Biden has shown that he's open to impeachment proceedings, which really, I think, as far as the Democrats are concerned, are sort of focused on keeping Trump away or locked out of trying to run again the next time around. But it's going to be a challenge, I think, for Joe Biden to keep on message and on target.
Absolutely. Neera Maria Potts, thank you so much for joining us for now. We'll keep coming back to you for more updates. So Nina was referring to how the impeachment trial of Donald Trump is expected to get underway in the US Senate. And there we are seeing the Clintons, Bill Clinton as well as Hillary Clinton, posing for the cameras.
It's interesting, Munmun, that all three former presidents, barring Trump, President Clinton, President George W. Bush and President Obama and their spouses were in attendance for the Biden ceremony. But Donald Trump and the former First Lady were conspicuous by their absence. They flew out of Washington and they were in Florida throughout the ceremony. So this was the first time in over a century that the outgoing president was absent from the inauguration ceremony of the incoming US president. All right, I'm told we have two guests joining us at this point in time. We have Professor Asad Madni, is a scientist with the University of California, Los Angeles, and joining us also from New Delhi is Dr. G. Balachandran, a former senior fellow at the IDSA in New Delhi, a think tank, and also the uncle of Vice President Kamala Devi Harris, joining us from New Delhi. Munmun.
Yes, so Dr. Balachandran, I'll come to you. Your thoughts on this historic occasion. Your niece is now the Vice President of the United States of America.
Look, I'm quite happy that Kamala Devi now has been confirmed as the Vice President. She is sworn and she has taken the oath. But the more important
I think we'll need to re-establish the connection with Dr. G. Balachandran.
I can't hear anything.
is this.
Okay. Dr. Asad, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Dr. Asad Madni, if you can hear us, your thoughts on the big takeaways from the inaugural address by President Biden. How do you what do you make of his speech and the important takeaways from that as well?
Well, I think, first of all, what's really important is to realize that there is a very big cultural difference in the approaches between Biden and Trump. I think we all know that. Biden is going to take a much more traditional approach towards the key issues rather than the abrasive manner in which the previous administration had, addressed people. Most importantly, I think it will not have major near-term impacts for India. The relationships is going to be very good for India. And if you look at Biden's track record, going way back when he was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman, when he actually went ahead and got the sanctions, U.S. sanctions lifted on India in 2001. And then in 2008, he was instrumental in getting India the wonderful U.S.-India nuclear accord. And then during the during the Obama administration, Vice President Biden was very instrumental in having India declared as a major defense partner.
Yes.
Now with Vice President Kamala Harris and 19 other very outstanding individuals with Indian heritage, I think there are tremendous amounts of opportunities for India and U.S. relationships.
Absolutely. Dr. Balachandran, I'll come to you now. You were telling us about your thoughts on such a historic occasion. Your niece is now the Vice President of the USA. And what do you think of the inaugural address by President Biden, in fact? Is that what America needed at this point in time?
Look, yes. Yesterday I told that Biden is not a great orator. I would like to see what he does. But yesterday, when they had the 400 lights lit along the pool, look, Biden is a very sincere fellow. He has lost, and he empathizes and sympathizes with those people who have lost their relatives or friends or anybody, and also who have lost them. So that nobody can beat him. And today his speech was very good. Now, all that we have to see is there's no question that it moved all those people who wanted unity, who felt that unity is needed, and who felt that Trump did not divided the country. The question is this: how far will it go towards making those people who were instrumental in dividing the country believing now that Biden will, in fact, unite the country? In fact, his speech was very sincere, and there's no doubt that he will do everything that he can. And fortunately, his first 100 days will accomplish a lot. That's what I'm looking for, okay?
Yes. Ambassador Vishnu, yes.
But I'm so happy that what Biden said, it was heartfelt. So I'm glad, I think that it will go a long way towards in the country than what it was before he took over. Okay?
Fair point. Ambassador Prakash, in your estimation, did President Biden tick all the right boxes by saying what he did just moments ago?
Oh, absolutely. It was a very appropriate address. He ticked all the right boxes, pressed all the right buttons. He came across as earnest. He came across as a unifier. And he came across as the gentleman that he is. Also, before I continue on this particular aspect, I would like to say that what we have witnessed today is a miracle, and it's a miracle of democracy, because only in a democracy can you have such a transformation of mood, atmosphere in a matter of 10 days. So as President Biden kept on saying, the democratic roots of the country were tested and they have emerged well, they have done well. He is conscious of the enormity of the challenge. And he was, even if a tad repetitive, he kept emphasizing that he promises to be the president of the entire country. But a thought that came to my mind is the people who believe in the rule of law, people who believe in democracy would certainly accept and be motivated by what he said. But what about people who believe not in facts but in alternative facts? What about people who are willing to challenge the truth? If there has been a fraud committed in the country. Now, whether it will impact the other side of the Trumponian US is a big question.
Absolutely. Professor Madni, I'll come to you now.
Sure.
I'll take an excerpt from Joe Biden's inaugural address. He said we need to set aside politics and face the pandemic as one nation. Will that be a clean break from what we've seen during the Trump administration?
I think it will be a clean break primarily because under the Trump administration, there has been no focused strategy. There has really been no international collaboration. There just didn't seem to be particularly any interest in recognizing the fact that people are dying all over the country. Biden, in his very first address, when he was declared as the vice president, he said, when he was declared as the candidate for presidency, he said the first thing he's going to do is address the pandemic. And to do that, I think he's going to have a very strategic focus in terms of bringing in at least 100 million people that will get vaccinated per day. And to do that, he's going to establish big collaborations. And I think India is going to play a major role in that respect. So will other countries. So I think as far as the pandemic is concerned, it is the #1 priority on his list. And I think we're going to see a completely different approach and a clean break from the Trump administration.
Right, we'll request all our guests to stay on. Let's update our viewers about what President Biden in his speech after his swearing in and after his oath being administered by the Chief Justice John Roberts said. Now, Biden in his speech after taking oath pledged to make America become the beacon of democracy for the world. He said that today we celebrate the triumph of democracy. The word of people has been heard and word of people has been heeded. Munmun.
He also said that democracy has prevailed. He said that the recent violence shook the very foundation of our democracy, but now democracy has prevailed.
My fellow Americans, this
yes, and I
is America's
think
day.
Thing to recognize
this
in
is
this
democracy's
statement.
day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
Right, we still have our guests with us on this special broadcast, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Dr. G. Balachandran and Professor Asad Madni joining us from the US. Ambassador Prakash, if I can come to you now. Now, clearly the focus was on domestic issues, and without doubt he spoke about tackling the COVID pandemic, reviving the economy and tackling the issue of racism, systemic racism at that, as he put it. But one particular phrase stood out from, and I think it would be interesting from India's perspective. Biden said that the US under him as the president will engage with the world to meet tomorrow's challenges. Now, is that a return to multilateralism? And if that is the case, is it good for India and the world?
It is. It is. I think while the focus, as you very rightly said, would be on domestic issues, because the country, the nation is traumatized. Mm-hmm. But what he has mentioned is that they will, what he said was that they will lead by the power of example, right, and they will engage with the world. Now, and he also indicated that there are common challenges. Now, which is very clear, you know, challenges of the climate change, global warming, that is something very close to his heart, of terrorism, of the rise of a power which is threatening status quo and wanting to build a different kind of a world where the rule of law does not prevail. So there are a number of challenges, and the US under his leadership, given the team that he has put together, Ramesh, the team that he has put together is a very experienced team. They are also focused on the Indo-Pacific region. Mm-hmm. So I think that what this presidency would move things in the right direction. It will be a slow process. I think to claw back the lost ground will be tough, but they are up to the task.
Indeed. Absolutely. Let's now go across live to Washington, D.C., where our correspondent is standing by, Nina Maria Potts. Nina, what are you hearing on the Senate confirmations? Because Senate hearings had begun, but there were certain reports that there could be a slight delay. Can you fill us in on that?
Well, on the Senate confirmation hearings, the whole process got underway actually on Tuesday afternoon ahead of the inauguration. Janet Yellen received a bit of a grilling, as did the incoming US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and it may be a protracted process. It depends really how willing Republican lawmakers are to play ball and to help with this transition. We have seen an enormously bumpy transition to date, with all kinds of obstacles put in Joe Biden's way, thanks to President Trump's reluctance to include him on briefings, national intelligence briefings. I think Republicans on the Hill have been fairly shaken by the events of 2 weeks ago and the attack on Congress. So it may be that in terms of their mood, and willingness perhaps to make sure that Joe Biden's transition is a bit smoother than it has been up until now, that once the rest of the confirmation hearings get underway, that it might be a smoother process than in the past.
Nina, will his national security team be in place on day one, considering that not all confirmations may happen?
Well, I think the team supporting Biden is extremely experienced, as one of your guests has pointed out. So in a way, it doesn't particularly matter if his entire team is in place or not. I think Joe Biden is striving to be bold and brave in his first moves. And there's some question over whether or not they're going to reach out to President Trump's team. President Trump, in keeping with recent tradition, has left him a letter in the Oval Office as he handed over, but of course was not terribly gracious in terms of reaching out to Joe Biden and his incoming team. So, I mean, there will be some big national security questions, and I think the bumpy transition has led to a delay. So Joe Biden will want to come into this presidency acting pretty swiftly, regardless of whether or not the confirmations are secured.
Nina, I remember asking you on the 3rd of November when the elections were happening, the results were coming out, and I remember asking you, is the result an endorsement of Joe Biden, the politician, the man, or a rejection or referendum on Trump? And you said, given the fact that he's won almost 74 million votes, itself a new record, that this was as much a vote for Trump as it is for Biden. How do you look at Trump's legacy of the last 4 years, and can Biden make a clean break with the past and chart a new course going forward?
Well, I mean, that was the tone that he was very much hoping to strike with his unity speech, which, by the way, I think India can be very proud that an Indian American wrote his speech for him, his inaugural speech of healing. I think it's very hard to tell how pro-Trump supporters, both mainstream and those that are perhaps more marginalized and more extremist in their views, are going to react to Joe Biden's message. I think it's a very, very difficult period of transition emotionally for the American public. Joe Biden stepping in as president doesn't just mark a turning point, in terms of international affairs and foreign policy, but it's going to require a psychological, mental shift. The Trump era was marked, unfortunately, by conflict. I think President Trump revealed to some extent where America's flaws are, the fact that America isn't the land of milk and honey that perhaps many people have perceived it to be from all around the world, and that it is broken. And I think the sheer numbers of dead during this coronavirus pandemic has to be Joe Biden's priority. We're expecting him to make an announcement, an executive order requiring mask wearing in all federal institutions and buildings, which seems an extraordinary thing that he should have to do. But it's a sign, I think, of the political divisions in this country, even when it comes to a national health crisis, an international health crisis like the pandemic, with holdouts, Trump supporters who just do not believe. There are many out there that do not believe that the pandemic even exists. And we heard Joe Biden in his speech talk about defending truth, making sure that lies are not not continued and not amplified. So that is going to be a major priority for him. So to your question as to whether or not he can bring those supporters along with him,
yes.
I fear the jury is very much out.
Absolutely. Well, Nina, we'll keep coming back to you. Thank you for now for joining us. And Dr. Balachandran, I'll come to you now. What's your sense of the kind of role that Kamala Harris will play in the Biden administration? Would her role, according to you, be limited to a few aspects or a few realms, or will she play a more across the board, across the spectrum sort of a role, considering the enormity of challenges facing the United States?
Look, Kamala is going to play a major role in the US administration in the coming years, far more than any other vice president in the US history. She will not be limited to a few areas here and there, but I think it will be right across the board, certainly in all domestic matters. Now, you see, Biden has a great advantage. The people are worried still about the COVID pandemic. He has set a target of 100 million in 100 days, and I think he will achieve it. That itself will show a great break from the Trump administration, which could not process or proceed further than 2 million or 1 million in 2 months. So I think Biden, with his 100-day program in coronavirus vaccination and in the fiscal relief program, will go a long way towards convincing those people who voted for Trump that the new healing is on and that he will do everything. Yes, a few die-hard Trump supporters may not still believe him, but I think Biden will achieve his objective of convincing the majority of not only the Democratic voters, but the Republican voters as well, that the future is bright because of the way he dealt with the coronavirus vaccination program and the fiscal relief program. So I've got great expectation. And on this matter, Kamala will be a great assistance. There's no question about it. I think on all domestic issues, including battling the pandemic and fiscal relief and unemployment and all those matters, Kamala will be the major factor other than the president.
Right. Point taken, Dr. Balachandran. Professor Madni, before I come to you, I want to update our viewers about some more aspects of Biden's speech. Now, Biden committed to bring America, in fact, together, uniting the American people and uniting the American nation as well. Take a listen.
In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this. Bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause.
Ambassador Prakash, your thoughts on what we just heard, Joe Biden inviting all Americans to join him in the cause of unity at a time when the American society is very polarized and fractured. Do you think that those sections of American society who form, say, the white supremacists or the extremists or the fringe group would be listening and maybe considering accepting what Biden has urged them to?
Munmun, unfortunately, it is not a fringe group. The segment of the American society, the ultra-right or the rednecks, they constitute a sizable segment. And even after the 6th of January incident, according to some of the opinion polls that have been conducted, amongst the Republicans, the support rate of former President Trump fell from about 83% to 70%. So as of today, 70% of the Republican base is still with former President Trump. Also, his war chest has swollen. After the elections, according to what I was reading, he has raised about $160 million. That's after the elections. So, unfortunate, I wish I can say with a clear conscience that these people will be moved, but it looks to be difficult. I think a lot of work has to be done. Imagine there were more than 100 congressmen and senators, in fact 137 Republican congressmen, if I remember it right, who supported a resolution to annul or reject the presidential election verdict or outcome. So that is the kind of deep fissures that are there in the society, not because they do not know, but they don't like it. They just do not like it, and they want to do it by force. So while President Joe Biden has done the right thing, he has been very earnest, he has made an emotional appeal. I don't think there are too many people could have pulled it off, because he is a true gentleman and somebody who believes in harmony. But his work is cut out, the nation's work is cut out. I don't think it is as easy as some people may want to make out to be.
Right. Professor Madni, there's a lot of interest in Asia in general and South Asia in particular about how Biden will tackle the China challenge or the China problem. Now, in your estimation, what would be Biden's policy towards China? And would he be as tough on China as probably Trump was?
That's a very good question, and I think I'll try to answer that in two parts. The China-US standoff has affected the entire world from an economic perspective. And it's not going to go away. It's there. The only difference will be that Biden is not going to be as abrasive in terms of unilateral decisions with China. I think it will be much more of a collective effort, not only within the US, but also on an international basis. But it's going to be a robust strategy. There's no question about it. There will be a very robust strategy with reference to the economic situation with China, with reference to the theft of intellectual property, and with reference to the Cybersecurity Act. So it will be a very robust strategy. India will be a major partner for the US, not only in these aspects, but maintaining the rebalancing of power in the Asian region. And so India really has to look at how it balances its relationships on a positive note, both with the United States and Russia, without isolating each one, and at the same time balancing the power with China. Having said that, the other aspect is, I think it would be very nice for India to play a proactive role in establishing itself. Now, as you know, we have this non-resident Indian Welfare Society headed by a very competent person, Mr. Deepak Singh, where we have these conferences that he arranges on special issues related to exactly the kind of questions you're asking, on US-China relationships, business relationships, the role of NRIs in uplifting the image of India. I think this is a golden opportunity for India to take advantage of those kind of forums in furthering our alliances with the United States. And I personally believe that the one thing that Joe Biden and the rest can learn from India is the following. India has always been based on the diversity of cultures, religions, customs, and people. And it is this very diversity that its inherent strength. And it underscores the fact that unity is the symphony of differences. And that is what made India great. I believe that with right strategic approaches, the best opportunity for India to maximize its potential is yet to come, so long as we do not fracture ourselves and on dividing lines with reference to customs, people, economic dividing lines, and religious dividing lines. As long as we can do that, I think we will have a tremendous opportunity to play a global role. And yes, China is not going away any place, and it's going to be a fine act, but it'll be an extremely robust strategy, and so will the strategy towards Russia. It's not going to just be a blind eye. Both these things are going to be very, very strict and robust, but very professionally executed strategies, and I think US-India partnership will play a major role in that.
Absolutely. Taking further the aspect of India-US partnership from here, well, Ambassador Prakash, I'll come to you. Antony Blinken, who is the incoming US Secretary of State, said this in a Senate hearing. He said that China poses the biggest threat to the US. He said that he agrees with Trump's tough approach on China, and that will be the basic principle of the Biden regime too. He also said on India that US is working with India so that no country in the region, including China, can challenge its sovereignty, and that US shares India's concerns on terrorism. Bipartisan support for ties with India began with towards the end of the Bill Clinton administration, and he also referred to the Indo-Pacific policy of Trump and referred to Biden's work in the Senate on the nuclear deal. Is all this sounding great?
Yes, it is sounding quite positive. It is also while talking about China, he endorsed the expression that the Chinese Communist Party was engaged in a genocide against Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. So he said that, but at the same time he also said, and I quote, that there are the adversarial aspects of the relationship, competitive ones, and still some cooperative ones.
Yes.
So we all know that President Biden is an internationalist. He is somebody who likes to find ways to work together. So while the divide between the US and China is quite deep, for the simple reason, or not so simple reason, the geostrategic reason that China is challenging the supremacy of the US. China is trying to supplant the US system with a China-centric world order, which is not acceptable. Yet I think they will try to find ways in which they can cooperate and yet try to sink their differences. Now, while on the subject, permit me to just add one more thing. There is the political America and there's the corporate America. The corporate America's mantra is profit, is the dollar income that they get. And there are 72,000 Chinese companies today, American companies in China. According to the latest statistics that I have seen, only about 17% of the American companies are either planning to leave or are thinking of leaving. And 83%, this is by the way AmCham report, and 83% of the American companies want to continue. So, and also the trade has not, there has not been much of a difference till November 2020. Only about $28 billion of trade has been reduced. So it's a mixed bag. On the economic front, it will still take time. Although when it comes to high tech, the decoupling has happened. As far as trade and services is concerned, it will take some time. And the effort will be made by China. I don't know how successful they will be to try and lure American companies and other international companies to continue in China.
Indeed. Why don't we take a moment to play out another soundbite from Biden's inaugural speech. Now, Biden reached out to all Americans and even his dissenters, saying right to dissent peacefully is what America is all about. Munmun.
And he also pledged to become the president of all Americans.
To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support it,
and these are live pictures coming to you from Washington, D.C., from the White House, where President Joe Biden is signing official documents in his capacity as the 46th President of the United States. And with him is Vice President Kamala Harris and other officials assisting him in his new administration. These are live images coming to you from Washington, D.C. as the signing ceremony, where he's signing executive actions as the 46th President of the United States of America.
Close to 15 executive orders signing was the plan of Team Biden, and Joe Biden there setting the ball rolling, hitting the ground running on day one of his presidency. The priorities have been clearly outlined by Team Biden. The priorities are fighting the coronavirus pandemic, fighting climate change, going back into the Paris Climate Accord, fighting racial inequalities, an immigration bill that will ensure that over 8 years, around 11 million illegal immigrants will get legal status and citizenship.
Absolutely. A number of executive actions he is expected to sign in the next few minutes or even the hour. As Munmun mentioned, he will make the wearing of mask compulsory for the first 100 days. He is aiming for 100 million vaccinations in the first 100 days as well. As Munmun mentioned, he wants to rejoin the Paris Climate Change Agreement, rejoin the World Health Organization as well. He will stop further work on the border wall as well, and stop construction of the controversial Keystone XL pipeline, and also extend moratoriums on student loan payments, foreclosures and eviction as well. Munmun?
Yes. Let's continue our discussion with Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Dr. G. Balachandran and Professor Asad Madani. Professor Madani, we are aware of the kind of focus that is there on fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, and Ramesh just mentioned that masks for the first 100 days are being made compulsory in what is being called the mask challenge. Masks are being made compulsory on federal land, on federal buildings, for federal employees, contractors. Besides that, there is a plan to roll out mass vaccinations, 100 million shots to be given in 100 days. Do you think that these steps will help bring the situation under control? Because currently we are looking at 4 lakh casualties, no less.
And Professor Bandi, if I can quickly add, what struck me most was Trump in his farewell address, nobody, not one soul in that audience was wearing a mask. In sharp contrast, almost everybody at the inauguration ceremony of President Biden was wearing a mask. So why this reservation still in the Republican camp against Biden's policies or strategy to deal with COVID pandemic?
You've asked a very, very important and a difficult question, but really a very important question. So I'll try to answer it in 2 ways. Is it possible to get to the 100 million vaccines in 100 days? I believe it is. And wearing the masks, it's a shame that the President of the United States has to mandate that on federal land. This should have been done a long time ago by the federal agencies themselves. But having said that, at least he's taken the right action. I think it's going to help. And I believe that we can get to the 100 million vaccines in 100 days as long as we have proper international collaboration with other countries, so that we don't depend just on Pfizer and Moderna, but we also get AstraZeneca, and we get countries like India to help in production of the vaccines. Now, will this solve the pandemic, which is the question you asked? I'm cautiously optimistic, because there are so many problems that we yet may not have anticipated. However, I think what he's putting down in place are the right moves, the right strategy, and the right approaches, and a sensible way of going about it. And I believe eventually we will be successful. To answer the next question, which you asked, why is it that we had so many people not wearing the masks, the Trump supporters, when Biden is asking the whole country to unite?
Because Biden said, in so many words, he said, set aside politics in his speech there.
Correct. That is correct. And then the fact is the following. You remember earlier we talked about how Biden won more votes than any president in US history. That's because maximum number of people turned out. And he won by more than 7 million popular votes. But do not forget that if you look at who won the second highest votes in US history, it was Trump. he got 70 million votes.
74.
So he has a following. He has a following that is huge. And over the period of time, he has convinced the people that not wearing the mask is an act of defiance, and that it is something that is contrary to their freedom. The kind of people that he's approaching are extremists. Some of them are marginal people that have just been brainwashed. I think they will eventually see the light. But there is a major portion of his followers that till today believe in conspiracy theories, QAnon theories, just outrageous things. And to them, this wearing of the mask is an infringement on their liberties. I know it sounds stupid, but that's exactly what it is. And so this was once again an act of defiance. And I believe that with all good intentions, Joe Biden will. He's an honorable man, and Kamala Harris is an honorable person, and they will do their very best to unite the country. But let us not forget that there is a very large percentage of people that still believe in Trump and his kind. And that's not going to go away that easily.
Yes. Dr. Balachandran, your closing remarks on what's your wish list as far as the Biden-Kamala Harris duo is concerned in the new government in America.
Look, I have no wish list, but I will only say this. You do not expect people to change overnight whether they are Democrats or Republicans. So there's no point in harping why people are not wearing masks at Trump's send-off. You expect people to change in one day? That's silly. What is going to happen? I agree. Biden will try to get as many vaccinations, 100 million in the 100 days. That will be the litmus test for making people turn away from the earlier thing of not washing face masks, thinking corona was a pandemic, is a myth, and all those things. And that he has got a very good, now that he is in power, he is capable of doing that. He has got the professional assistant who will tell him how to do that. He will follow their advice, unlike Trump. But do not think that everything in a binary. His relationship with China is not going to be that he is going to fight with them or be friends with them. Everybody has got a binary. Don't look at the 0-1. He will try to do what he can. He will have his own agenda of what he would take from Chinese and what he will not concede to Chinese. That may be different from what we in India think we should do. But nevertheless, there is a broad agreement between India and the United States on the future trajectory of Asian security in the context of China's aggressive behavior these days. We should look into that and see how we can cooperate with the United States in furthering. There's no pointing that somebody said that the United States said that China is considering a genocide. Have we said anything? No. So we cannot expect US to carry the burden of fighting with China alone.
Right.
We'll have to see how we can do that. I find it, I can't understand at all. When people say that now that he should do this, now that he should do that, and when people say what you are going to do, oh, that I don't know. Please, unless you make up your mind as what you are going to do also, and what you would like them to do that, there's no point in saying what Biden should do, what Kamala should do, what others should do. I mean, it is going to be a joint effort. It should be a joint effort, not asking, demanding what he should do.
Right. On that point, I want to thank all our guests who have joined us and been with us for the last hour and more. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Dr. G. Balachandran, and Professor Asad Badni, who joined us from the US. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And we are continuing our comprehensive coverage of Biden in the White House. He literally is in the White House now.
Absolutely. We have two new occupants in the White House, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris is the first woman, person of color, and Indian American woman to enter the White House as the Vice President of the United States.
Absolutely. History has been scripted on the 20th of January 2021. We'll take a break at this point in time, but don't go anywhere. We'll be back very soon.
All India Radio.
But won the first prize. बहुत रोमांटिक साथ-साथ it has undergone 9 revisions. Cully, with 903 rating points, is 34 points behind Smith, 900. All India Radio. The news read by Anuja Kumar.
Namaskar.
Welcome back. You're watching our continuous comprehensive coverage. Biden in the White House. Biden is in the White House in the capacity of the President of the United States of America. He is the 46th President. Kamala Harris too has scripted history, becoming the first woman Vice President, the first person of color and the first Indian American to be the Vice President of the US.
Right, so if you're joining us, a quick recap of the news so far. As Moon mentioned, Joe Biden is the 46th President of the US. Kamala Harris, the Vice President, and Prime Minister Modi becoming the first few world leaders to tweet congratulations to both leaders, President Biden and Vice President Harris. And these are shots from just moments ago where President Biden took the oath on the west front of the Capitol building, administered the oath by Chief Justice John Roberts. These are visuals from just moments ago when he was administered the oath and made the 46th President of the United States.
Kamala Harris was also sworn in as the 49th Vice President of United States, the daughter of immigrants from Jamaica and India. Kamala Harris made history as America's first woman and first person with South Asian roots to take the office of the Vice President of the US.
Right, and Joe Biden reached out to all Americans and even his dissenters, saying the right to dissent peacefully is what America is all about.
And he pledged to become the president of all Americans.
To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. If you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion.
No person alive has attended more of those lunches than President Biden has. It's an important moment where it's bipartisan. It's the time to bond between the executive and the legislative branch of the government. We probably don't need as much bonding because we already have that natural bonding with you and the traditions here. By those traditions, usually there's a painting at the front of that event that the chairman picks. This time, not knowing we were going to have an event until what we were going to do about an event until late, I asked Dr. Biden to help pick the painting, and this is the one that she recommended. The painting is landscape with rainbow. Rainbow always a good sign. It's loaned to us for today from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. The artist, Dr. Robert Sheldon Duncanson, he was the best-known African-American painter in the years surrounding the Civil War. He was based in Cincinnati, encouraged by abolitionists who, among other things, sponsored a trip for him to do some study in Europe. This is a painting that he painted in 1859, and I think maybe it's sort of the classic America as a paradise painting that a lot of painters were doing then. But for him, a black artist painting this painting that's so much like an American utopia on the verge of a war that we would fight over slavery, makes all of that, I think, even more interesting in that while he faced lots of challenges, obviously was optimistic even in 1859 about America. And so, Dr. Biden, thanks for helping select this painting, and glad to have all four of you here as we move on to my good friend Senator Klobuchar.
I like the rainbow.
The rainbow is always a good sign. Let's hope so.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Door number 2. Oh, we are. Good. Mr. President, First Lady, Madam Vice President, and our very first second gentleman, on behalf of the American people, it is our honor to present these custom-made crystal vases commemorating your historic inauguration. Lennox, which you know is a great company, American company, has handcrafted these gifts for the past 9 presidential inaugurations. It is a good thing I don't have to hand them to you personally. They each weigh with the base 32 pounds, but combined 64. But Jill, I know, is very strong and could take them both. Exactly. But the Lennox company is actually based in Bristol, Pennsylvania, which you know, Mr. President, is a mere 132 miles from Scranton, since we know today all roads lead to Scranton. The team at Lennox has worked for months to capture the spirit of this inauguration and your incoming administration. Mr. President, your vase features the White House, and Vice President Harris's features the U.S. Capitol. The gifts represent the hope and the faith the American people have placed in you to move our country forward. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, while the pandemic has sadly limited our usual hospitality, as others have mentioned, I'm very glad we still carry on some of our favorite inaugural traditions. It's my honor and privilege to help present these flags of our nation that were flown over today's event here at the Capitol. Now, I have to make one point of personal privilege on behalf of the Senate. With all due respect to our distinguished Speaker and our colleagues from the House, I have to note, not only did we just swear in a son and daughter of the Senate to these high offices, but indeed both these former senators skipped the House altogether. The Star-Spangled Banner is our greatest symbol of our endurance of the American idea. It flies over this building on triumphant days and on tragic ones, over all factions and all parties. And today this flag flew over our former colleague's inauguration as the very first female Vice President of the United States. So to our very distinguished former colleague, Madam Vice President, please accept this flag with the highest compliments and congratulations of the United States Senate.
The distinguished leader of the Senate pointed out that he has hosted this lunch for members of the Senate who have become president and vice president. But I have the privilege of giving the flag to the President of the United States, the flag that was flown when you were sworn in, Mr. President. This flag may it reflect all that is said about your inauguration. America united. May it be a symbol of the hope, the healing, and the just all of the enthusiasm that you have for our country. And as we heard the beautiful national anthem, when we're at the stadium and they say, is our flag still there? Then you say, play ball. right there. Play ball. So we're going to get ready to play ball. We're ready to go with the inspiration of our flag flying. But again, on behalf of the House of Representatives, it is my privilege to extend to you the flag that was flown the early moment that you were sworn in as President of the United States. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Dr. Biden. Thank you. If we had the lunch, we would have had California wine. Is that not right? Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, congratulations. With liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Hey, man. Long time no see.
Congratulations, Mr. President. Thank you.
Modern technology, right? It's a good picture, too. The President Biden, Vice President Harris, Dr. Biden, and Mr. Imhoff.
Right, so you're watching the live proceedings from the U.S. legislature, where we saw President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris.
Well, President Washington was
in a ceremony at the U.S. legislature, that's Capitol Hill, along with Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Leader of the Senate Majority, Mitch McConnell. Munmun, we are now joined by two other special guests. Joining us is Ambassador Manjeev Puri and Professor W.P.S. Sidhu, joining us from the U.S. And also joining us, Munmun, is our colleague Kate Fisher, who is standing by in Washington, D.C.
Yes, Kate, I'll come to you. Tell us about the itinerary of the President as well as the Vice President from here on.
Well, they have now completed that inauguration ceremony in front of the US Capitol, and they have gone inside the building now, where the President will go to the President's room to sign some official inauguration papers. He could also use that moment to sign some executive orders, but we think he'll do that when he gets to the White House and is seated in the Oval Office proper. Usually in an inauguration, they would then have a special luncheon within the Capitol building, but that is not happening like so many other things this year. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, a shared lunch is not the best of ideas. So instead, we understand that congressional leadership will be presenting the Bidens and Kamala Harris and her husband, Doug Emhoff, with gifts to commemorate today rather than have a luncheon. Then the President and the First Lady and Kamala Harris, Vice President, and her husband will travel to Arlington Cemetery, just across the Potomac River from here. They'll be joined by former President Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama, as well as Hillary and Bill Clinton, and George Bush and his wife as well. And there they will lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier to pay tribute to the US military on this inauguration day. Once that business has been dealt with, President Biden and his wife will make their way.
Kate, I'm afraid we'll have to stop there because we'll have to fix the audio with you in just a bit. But if I can bring in our guests on this discussion, and since they are joining us for the first time on this broadcast, quick comment from you, Ambassador Manjeev Puri and Professor Sidhu, your thoughts on the Biden inaugural speech in particular, and what this means for India and the world going forward. Starting with you, Ambassador Puri.
Thank you very much, Ramesh. I'm absolutely delighted to be on your program.
Welcome,
and
Ambassador.
More than that, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go on, yeah.
And I am extremely delighted that Doordarshan is carrying out this live coverage of what I believe is a seminal and very important event in the global calendar of what is happening. President Biden was obviously all-encompassing. The issue, especially in recent weeks and of course over a long period of time, has been about polarization in America, especially what you saw in the last week. He was all-encompassing, and if you notice, he especially said, I will be the president for my supporters, and I will also be the president for those who didn't vote for me. And then made a very important point. If after listening to me, you choose to disagree, that's your right, and you can do so peacefully. I think that was the big message that he wanted to give to the Americans, but he also gave a message to the world. He said that America would be engaged with the world. Please note, he didn't use the word climate change, but he spoke about the stress on the planet. He spoke about allies. I think that is particularly important because in the times that we live today, COVID, the rise of China, it is particularly important that the world's most important leader, the world's most important country leads, as he said himself, not by their power, but by the power of their example. And I think these are extremely important matters. As far as India is concerned, I don't want to go into the entire gamut of President Biden's friendship with India over a long period of time, but I do want to say that a better run world order and a world order in which rules are followed and in which bridling takes place for anyone who looks at expansionism is a world order which is good for India, and India will be able to leverage this. We are also friends of America and we've come places, and I think all of this should augur well for the Indo-American friendship too.
Indeed, and may I quickly welcome Professor K.P. Vijayalakshmi also, who is joining us on this special broadcast. Welcome, Professor. But before that, Professor Sidhu, your thoughts on the Biden inauguration and his speech in particular.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you again on this really important occasion. And just it's such a remarkable contrast from the remarks that you heard this morning from the outgoing President Trump, which were frankly rambling and graceless, and really kind of going back in some ways to the American carnage kind of idea that he had. And in his vision, of course, we are now in a post-pandemic world, which is not at all the case. And if you contrast that with President Biden's very measured remarks, they were very concise. They were directed both at domestic audiences, but also at international audiences. He mentioned, of course, Abraham Lincoln, which is very pointed because Lincoln, a lot of people tend to forget, was a Republican president, not a Democrat president. He also recognized and appreciated his predecessors, all of whom were present there, with the notable exception, of course, of Donald Trump. He looked at healing inside and within the US, but also marked made a clear announcement that the US is back in the game as in global governance and is going to reach out particularly to allies. He very deliberately did not get into the details of how that would be. Much of that is being played out in the various confirmation hearings that began yesterday and will continue now. So overall, it's an internal message of unity, a word that he stressed time and time again, to move forward with confidence and compassion, but also very much that the US is going to lead the world again. And then you're going to see an element of continuity both with the Obama presidency, but in some key elements also with the Trump presidency.
Professor Vijayalakshmi, your thoughts on the inaugural speech and inauguration ceremony as a whole, and do you think that Joe Biden spoke like a statesman?
Yes, indeed. I think he not only spoke as a statesman, but he brought a certain gravitas, a kind of dignity and that innate decency that we've come to expect from public officers and people who lead, public positions. He also spoke, I think, with a kind of a historicity. He brought out Abraham Lincoln. He brought out the historical traditions of American presidency. He also confirmed what we now have come to call as many firsts that this election has actually brought out. The inauguration of I mean, the taking of oath of Vice President Kamala Harris is so significant, and the kind of open invitation that he gave to all of America. It was a very soulful speech. He was also very mindful, I think, of all the kind of inter-religious, intercultural and diversity that America represents, both ideally and aspirationally. He kept talking about towards a more perfect union, and I think that's a very truthful statement, talking about truth, talking about the need to follow truth, talking about the need to speak to each other and for each other, and talking about a cause rather than just the power or the position that one would occupy. So it's a sort of a soul-stirring speech in which I would say, some of his, I would at least think, his Catholic roots came through to me very strongly. He's the second, that's again another very important historic sort of milestone, I would say, because he's only the second Catholic president that the United States has had, apart from John F. Kennedy. And the stirring speech he made with the Father Danovan blessing and all of that, I think there is a need that he spoke. I remember in the first debate, many things were said, etc. But he said, when you see that empty space and you're missing a loved one about the COVID pandemic, that struck a real chord in most Americans' hearts. And today, I think, was another such speech where he struck a chord when he said that the COVID pandemic is something I'm going to deal with straight away. I'm not waiting for anything. I'm going to tackle all the triple crisis of both the COVID pandemic, the racial injustice that we have been witnessing, and of course the economic stimulus that will go a long way. And he has also promised that he would, follow his speeches with actions, because this is a very truncated ceremony, as you saw, and I think that really moves people much more than just words, because he went straight down to the office and began his work. But all in all, I would say it is a soul-stirring speech.
Yes. Ambassador Puri, if I may come to you, taking an excerpt from Biden's speech, he said, "We will repair our alliances, engage with the world on today's and tomorrow's challenges." When he says we will repair our alliances, does it only mean that he will re-enter the treaties that the Trump regime moved itself out of, or does it also point to what United States perhaps wants to do, reform the WHO, reform the UN, and reform various multilateral bodies?
Absolutely. I think when he refers to alliances, first and foremost, we must remember that in his quest for America first, President Trump certainly ruffled the oldest and perhaps the most powerful allies of the United States, the Europeans. And I think we should be very clear that this particular alliance will be very important for President Biden, who is of course an old and veteran foreign policy hand, and he knows the value of this particular alliance. But I would also like to add that this is a great fillip for multilateralism. Rejoining or becoming active in the WHO, looking at the World Trade Organization, trying to see what you can use the United Nations for. I have absolutely no doubt that those things would happen. Perhaps the climate agreement would be the first one that he would sign in, which would be a clear sign that the United States is back at the helm of steering multilateralism and global governance. Now, before I end, I also want to say that he would also be strong with those countries and those leaders with whom perhaps President Trump also had a good relationship. I mean, India among them. Let's take Japan, countries in the Indo-Pacific and other parts of the world. Because a major reason for why I say this is that while President Biden was out of power for the last 4 years, America may not have changed that much, but the world certainly has changed. And one of the biggest changes has been the in-your-face rise of China, noticed of course through the corona pandemic, but its expansionism, President Xi Jinping's very firm and aggressive posturing in the world. I think all of these make for the fact that there is a certain change scenario, and President Biden would be cognizant of it as a veteran foreign and security policy practitioner, and he would take along a much greater part of the world than alone the old traditional allies. And I think this is something very good for the world.
Professor Sidhu, while we wait for President Biden to inspect a military guard of honor in Washington, D.C., may I quickly ask you for your views on the Modi-Biden dynamic and how that might shape up going forward? Because Prime Minister Modi is one leader who invests a great deal of time, energy and effort into establishing a personal rapport with world leaders. We saw that with President Obama, we saw that with Trump, and now with President Biden. So how do you see the Modi-Biden dynamic shaping up going forward?
I think if you look at Indo-US relations in particular and the role of personalities, all that personalities are able to do, and here of course we're talking about both Prime Minister and President,
right,
is to determine the pace of the relationship, not the trajectory of the relationship. I think the US-Indian relationship, the trajectory of that relationship has been really on an even keel since President Clinton's first visit,
right,
after India became, declared itself as a nuclear weapon state. The fact that President Biden is a known India hand, he was there as part of the Obama administration, who, by the way, was the first president to be invited to the Republic Day event.
Right.
You can see that there's a great degree of continuity. Now, of course, Prime Minister Modi's style of diplomacy is much more personal and much more personable, but so is Joe Biden. So the famous Modi hug is certainly going to be met with an equally affirmative Biden hug as well. So I think in that sense, I do not see there being any backtracking on the pace of the relationship going forward. This is not to say that there are not going to be issues between the two countries which are going to be stumbling blocks. Certainly, human rights, trade, for example, the infamous H-1B issue is always going to, visas is always going to be an issue there. But the overall trajectory, I think, is going to be far more same old and continuity, but perhaps there may be a greater focus on how to address China.
Absolutely. Professor Vijay Lakshmi, I'll come to you now. Antony Blinken, while speaking to the US Senate, in the Senate hearing, said that India has been a bipartisan success story of successive US governments right from the time of Bill Clinton in the late 1990s, and that the US is working with India so that no country in the region, including China, can challenge its sovereignty. This at a time when there is a confrontation that is still on between Indian and Chinese troops. There is a standoff in a way that's on along the LOC in Ladakh still, and we've seen the kind of support that has come in earlier from the Trump administration, and a lot of vocal support also coming in earlier from Mike Pompeo. So do you think that the Biden administration also would like to make a point that it is extremely effective in its approach towards China, though it may not be as provocative, and does India stand to gain with such an approach?
Yes, to both your last observations. I think this particular statement coming from the hearings of Secretary of State certainly is a signaling to China that there is going to be a continuity in certain elements of US's China policy, and US-India relations will intersect the relation or the conflation of US-China conflicts and so on. So I think this is what we can learn to expect. It will be nuanced, but the signaling has already begun, and I think it's begun very well for India, because it is of some importance that in the first nomination hearing, you're hearing about China and the recognition that across there is as much a bipartisan consensus on the China threat as there is a bipartisan consensus on the potential and the defining nature of transformative relationship between India and the United States. So there is going to be a continuity, and that is going to be good for India. And there should not be, I think, transitions have traditionally provoked a certain amount of anxiety. So I do see why you are raising this question. There was some anxiety when President Obama was sworn in because of certain other things that we were talking about then. And then even during President Trump when he was sworn in. So this, I think, is beginning to settle down in some ways as we see unfold the actual explanation of what is a nuanced policy towards China. The second thing is, I think, if you look at the trio that he has, the number of Indian American origin people that he has taken in his White House and in many of the appointments, I think the last count was 20, 19 maybe, but 3 of them in national security, Tarun Chhabra, Sumona Guha, and one more, I think. They have actually been very much hands-on. They're called what I would say a veteran team. So Biden is not, he's an old hand in many ways to Asia. He has piloted several things through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which I think you mentioned at some point. And he's also piloted other things like, the first Navy warship to India's acquisition of that. There are a number of things I can cite. But this signaling is a foretaste of this nuanced policy. And also, he needs, I think, to signal to the domestic audience that he's not soft on China, which was part of the Trump campaign during the final days, that, this is, Joe Biden will not be tough on China. And that is certainly something we saw that towards the end of the campaign, he had turned very, very hawkish. And this hawkishness, this pan-American understanding of China threat within the Congress and in the executive, I think is something that we can see continuing. And despite our understanding that there will be a multilateralism, which again I think is a splendid opportunity for India and is in fact good for India, you can see much more growth on the major ideas of STA1, major defense ally. And from Kerry to Mattis, we've seen a number of statements that have remained positive on the idea of centrality of India in many theaters, including the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. Ambassador Manjeev Puri, as we watch these live visuals coming to us from Washington, D.C., of President Biden heading to his next engagement at the Arlington Cemetery along with the former Presidents Obama, Bush and Clinton. I want to ask you a two-part question. Now, you are the practitioner of diplomacy on this panel, on this special broadcast. So I have to ask you these couple of questions. One, what did you make of the previous administration under President Trump, especially Secretary of State Pompeo, their policy and attitude towards the treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, for instance, how they called it genocide not so long ago, in fact, just a couple of days ago, and their policy or stance on the issue of Taiwan as well. What do you make of that, and is that a ploy to box Biden in and to preempt him, number one? And number two, the presence of the diplomats in Team Biden, Tony Blinken, Wendy Sherman, we have Victoria Nuland, Kurt Campbell, the Indo-Pacific czar. Now, these are familiar faces for New Delhi diplomats. Is that an advantage, in a good omen going forward as well? Or do you think familiarity might breed contempt sometime down the road?
Thank you for this question. Let me start with your second question first.
Sure.
Look, there should be no doubt that veteran foreign policy and security policy expert President Joe Biden has brought into his team those people who are familiar with foreign and strategic affairs. That the world may have changed in the last 4 years is now a self-evident fact, and China being a strategic competitor for the United States is now something which is, I should say, across the United States, almost everyone knows this particular fact. So this team will have to deal with this changed reality, and I'm sure they are up to it. The fact that they know us is a positive in my side, because otherwise it means that you have to spend time trying to figure out what exactly is the issue, who are the personalities, and what is it that they want. These are people who can hit the ground running. Now, of course, this also brings with it a certain amount of baggage from the old times. But we too are a changing nation. We have now become the 5th largest economy in the world pre-COVID days. And this particular change, plus our growing clout even in the G20, in 2023 will be the chair of the G20. All of these particular factors are things which will certainly be important in the minds of those who will be shaping global policy for the United States, and hence I believe is something which is important, useful, although we must remember that they also know what we are talking about,
right,
and they have their own ideas on these matters, which are also known to us. Now coming to the China issue, and you raised two very specific things, the matters of Uyghur and Taiwan. Look, President Trump was extremely vocal, and Secretary Pompeo, in a sense, echoed that particular thing, especially in the last few days, when it would perhaps have been impossible for President Trump to himself say or do anything, but Secretary Pompeo was particularly important. Does this hobble the Biden administration? Is this an advantage? I think this is something we'll have to see how they play it out, because, it can be used as an asset. After all, what you perhaps wanted to do yourself, but would not have thought that you would do it, you would instead use other tools to put this kind of bridling on China, has been done by somebody else, and you can always take umbrage under the fact that, look, it's there, it's not exactly easy to turn it around, etc., etc., and then China would have to react and do something. If you notice, I believe China has levied some sanctions against Secretary Pompeo, etc. today.
Right.
These also become issues that would have to be thought out by the Biden administration of what does it mean that a former Secretary of State, who till a few hours back was the Secretary of State, sanctions have been levied against him, because after all this was a collective decision taken at the highest levels in the US government. Similarly about Uyghurs, this has been an area where not much calling out was done. And indeed, not much is focused globally, simply because the United States has been far too busy with other things. But when you call these out, then the Chinese do realize that they also have Achilles' heels. It isn't such a simple matter that you can free ride the world and go ahead with your own ideas of expansionism,
right,
without caring much about what is happening in your side and thinking that the world is very happy looking at the Chinese market and everybody is very hunky-dory. But no, I think these are all issues in which you have both possibilities. How this administration will play it, I think they need to take these measured calls. But I am sure they will leverage these particular things to hopefully their advantage and hopefully to the advantage of the world, in which case we too would be advantaged on this particular things as things currently stand.
Right. So,
yes.
Moon, I'm told Nina Maria Potts is also back with us from Washington, D.C.
Yes, Nina, coming to you, I was comparing the speech of Joe Biden with that of some of the earlier presidents, and what I found was one similarity. John F. Kennedy in 1961 had made a call for public service in his inaugural address. Tell fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Barack Obama in 2009 echoed Kennedy, calling for a new era of responsibility where Americans must recognize their duties to themselves, the nation and the world. And here is Joe Biden saying, raging virus, climate crisis, systemic racism, we face them all at once. We have a great responsibility. We will be tested, we will be judged by how we resolve these cascading challenges. Will we master them? I think we will. So there is a common thread that is running across these three inaugural addresses, appealing to people to recognize their sense of responsibility. Would you say that these have been the need of the times every time this has happened?
Well, it's an interesting point, and it's very interesting to draw those parallels out from inaugural speeches that have gone before. I think one of the difficulties with Trumpism and the last 4 years is that America has lived up to the perception and reputation that individualism is more important than the collective responsibility of the people. And Joe Biden, you're right to say, was much more focused on concentrating on that sense of collective responsibility, not just to repairing and restoring America, but repairing and restoring America's reputation in the world. And I think we will be seeing him rolling out these executive orders, operating in the interests of allies as well as America. We're expecting him to reverse, for example, President Trump's ban on travel from Muslim-majority nations. He may be taking some more executive action on immigration and certainly climate change. I think in the first sort of 10 to 100 days, we might see him reverse the Trump ban on H-1B visas, the lottery system, rather, that President Trump sort of announced 2 weeks ago, which was meant to have 60 days to come into effect. So I think Joe Biden is trying to unpick many of Trump's unilateral actions, but at the same time, Democrats are going to have to do a bit of soul searching. I heard you speaking to your guest just then about China and the importance of China. Democrats are going to have to decide and sort through what aspects of policies of the Trump administration they're going to salvage, especially when it comes to countries like China. Or are they going to return to former democratic approaches to multilateralism? So those are some tough questions, I think, for this administration.
Indeed. And very quickly, Nina, since you refer to Trumpism, now what kind of a future do you look for the Republican Party? Will the party now need to regroup and look for an able candidate going forward sometime down the road? Because Trump, in his farewell address at the St. Andrews Air Force Base, said, I'm quoting him, "We will be back in some form," unquote. The report that he wants to float his own party, possibly called the Patriot Party. So is Trump looking at seriously at 2024?
I think it depends whether or not with the impeachment trial the wind is taken out of his sails. If he is banned from running again in 4 years' time, I think we may see a very different sort of Trump operate from this so-called alternative power base in Florida, where he plans to base himself and his family. I think it could play out a bit like a sort of a season that's gone too long in a Netflix TV reality series. The big question is, will a former president like Trump lose his power, and will people become less interested in him because he can no longer make presidential decisions and deliver on promises that he's made, whether it's immigration or anything else? I think the Republican Party is facing a possible splintering. And I think it's very unclear which direction it goes in, how many will remain loyal to the former president, and will they be less interested in being loyal to him if he has none of the clout that he has had for the past 4 years.
Nina, since you referred to the upcoming impeachment trial of Donald Trump in the Senate, can that impact the momentum of Biden's agenda? Because Biden has been lukewarm on this issue, and could there be a Congress hurdle then further enhanced for Joe Biden's team or administration, because he has to ensure that his immigration bill, for instance, or the economic stimulus package bill goes through both houses of US Congress?
I think it's a question of the Biden administration deciding whether or not the biggest threat is now allowing former President Trump to build up momentum from his alternate power base in Florida, or whether the threat is further down the road. I think it is in the Democrats' interest to try and obviously impeach Donald Trump in a bid to stop him from running for office again. And that calculation, I think, has been playing out behind the scenes within the Biden administration. And you're right, he was, I think, lukewarm about the impeachment proceedings, but we are told that his administration and his advisors are open to impeachment proceedings, with the caveat that it doesn't derail his economic agenda, his agenda to try and fix the coronavirus pandemic and to deliver on some of the promises that he's made. He wants congressional focus and congressional bipartisan support for some of these big top priorities. So I think that it's, there are concerns that this will derail that whole agenda, but nonetheless, the risk of President Trump perhaps making a comeback is much greater further down the line.
Indeed. Nina, as we watch these live visuals of President Biden's motorcade making its way to the Arlington Cemetery, where he will pay tributes at the tomb of the unknown soldier, along with former Presidents Clinton, Bush and Obama, I want to ask you about one issue which you have not touched so far, and that is the relationship between the White House under Biden and media. Now, media had a very testy relationship with Trump in the White House. What kind of a relationship do you see between Biden and the media going forward? Can we see more White House press briefings, regular briefings going forward? Number one. And number two, will Biden be as active on Twitter or social media as Trump? Because Trump actually formulated policies and announced it on his own personal Twitter handle.
Very good question. I think we'll have to wait and see. Joe Biden, in his speech, his inaugural speech, spoke about truth and defending truth and making sure that lies were not amplified. And of course, that was a direct reference to the way that President Trump announced his policies on Twitter, and also, I think, undermined faith in the democratic system among his supporters. There's an interesting editorial discussion, I think, going on in newsrooms around the world, and perhaps also in your newsroom, over the extent to which journalists should still continue to cover Trump now that he is out of office.
Right.
And I think it will depend very much on merit as to whether or not he moves and shakes in the way that he used to. But I think, you know, the takeaway for a lot of news editors is Trump is no longer president and therefore does not merit the coverage that he was getting either through social media or the mainstream media. And I think, you know, certainly the mainstream media will be very much keen to return to those White House briefings. We haven't had a State Department briefing really properly in weeks. I mean, we used to go every day to the State Department to try and understand State Department policies and State Department actions, and that will, you know, hopefully change, I think, under Biden to allow that sort of access. I think it's worth remembering that under President Obama, he didn't have a particularly close relationship with the media. People forget that access was often blocked to President Obama's press team. And so, you know, it's always a bumpy relationship, I think, between the media and any president here in the United States.
Nina, we've also seen how in the last couple of hours of Trump's presidency, a key decision was taken by the Trump administration over travel curbs, and just before demitting office, Trump had ordered an end to ban on travelers from Europe and Brazil that was put in place earlier, you know, to control the pandemic. And Biden's aides then said that he would rescind the move when he takes office on Wednesday. Is there a debate going on within the United States on the kind of orders that were made by a lame duck precedent?
Yes, there's a kind of suspicion, I think, that the Trump administration is trying to complicate matters for the Biden administration. I mean, there's this question of the travel ban that you rightly say. I mean, that was in place for months. It was a very controversial ban. And so the idea that former President Trump lifted or was trying to lift that ban, and that Joe Biden will put it back in place, saying now is not the time to open up travel at a time when all these new strains are kind of colliding on several continents around the world. There was also Mike Pompeo's last act, with this declaration on China in relation to Xinjiang, and this declaration of genocide, which I think was designed, although, you know, Mike Pompeo, I think, genuinely feels very strongly about Xinjiang, and it's not the first time he's referenced genocide. It was clearly a deliberate attempt to complicate the political landscape for the Biden presidency, which is going to have to really sift through which China policies it sticks to, which ones it revives from previous democratic eras.
Right.
And I think Joe Biden is going to have to walk a very tight balancing act, a very tight line on all sorts of policy areas.
Right. All right. On that note, Nina Maria Potts in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for joining us on a special broadcast. Appreciate it. Thank you. Right. So we're watching these live visuals coming to you from Arlington Cemetery, where President Biden is paying tribute at the tomb of the unknown soldier in the presence of former presidents Obama, Clinton and George Bush. And while we are on these visuals, I want to go across to our guests. If I can go across to Professor Sidhu. Now, Professor Sidhu, your sense of the India-US dynamic shaping up going forward, do you get the sense that economic issues or economic diplomacy might prevail over all other issues?
Ramesh, thanks very much for that question. And before I turn to that, I just want to also pick up on something that your correspondent just said before this, and your question about whether this is going to be a administration which is based on diplomacy, using Twitter as a form of diplomacy or policy making. I'll just remind you that one of the last things President Trump said this morning, in his remarks, was that we were not a regular administration. And I think what you can expect from the Biden administration is a regular administration, a very boring, a very mundane, ordinary kind of administration. It will be back to normal. So you're going to see a lot of those kind of policies not happening on Twitter, not happening, at the spur of the moment, but much more considered, much more thought out, in a much more traditional sort of way. With that context, on the Indo-US dimension, I think there are three aspects that we need to look at. Number one is the bilateral. And this is, of course, what most of us sort of tend to focus on. And economic is certainly going to be part of that as well. And I think the US under Biden is going to be far more generous about the surplus, trade surplus that India has, which, as you know, President Trump was very vexed about because he seemed to think trade was only about surpluses and deficits, right? But there's much more to that. The second aspect is going to be how India and the US work in the broader region of the Indo-Pacific. And there again, we've already heard, a great amount of detail, including from the confirmation hearings of how the Biden administration is going to empower the quadrilateral security dialogue between Japan, Australia, India, and the United States to do more. What we haven't talked about as much is the third aspect, and I have to mention this obviously in the presence of Ambassador Manjeev Puri, is what India and the US can do at the global governance level. He made a reference to the G20, which is going to, in my opinion, I think become much more empowered now. Because the recognition is that the international community or the globe cannot get out of this economic crisis individually or by putting nation first, but they'll have to do it collectively. The second aspect is, of course, on the UN Security Council. India is now, as you know, an elected member for 2 years, and relations between China and India are also starting to play out in the Security Council. So it's not surprising that Foreign Secretary Shringla has already identified a greater coordination between India and the US on Security Council issues. And I think that is something that you're going to start to see and continue and strengthen under the Biden administration. So you will see, Indo-US relations not only at the bilateral, but at the regional and the multilateral level, starting to move forward in a much more concerted way and much more, kind of focused way, a consistent way than it was under President Trump.
Okay, we just have 3 minutes left for this special broadcast. Ambassador Puri and Professor Vijayalakshmi, closing remarks from you that we know what the agenda of Biden team would be in the immediate term, but what change do you expect within the United States and in the India-US relationship in the medium term?
Well, I think the first thing I would expect is the stability should guide us through the traditional diplomacy. Biden has promised to restore, repeal, revise, and become reliable. So the new mantra I would expect is not just strategic partnership, but trusted partnership. The second is, I think, the economic drives that you talked about. But I think there's been a great deal of change because Asia has started working towards non-US, non-China-centric binary. They have started doing much more business with each other. There is a RCEP now where there is China, but the TPP has continued. So I think US and India have to think of innovative ways in which we can bring back some kind of economic muscle by hustling. I don't know whether that makes sense, but you need to work together. There's a real common interest there because both India and the United States are out of these very two important global, regional, as well as, having the impact globally because it would set standards. The third is within the United States. I think despite the terms that we've heard about a new party coming in, I think third parties have traditionally not taken very great root. I do understand 74 million is a large number, but 80 million. The turnout this time was again another historic first. I do understand the gravity of it, but I think the Republican Party is going to do some real serious soul searching, and I think they are looking at some level of coming back in a very different, it can't be just Trumpism, it has to be Trump plus something. So I do expect to see much more happening in the Republican Party, with the Democratic Party also pushing back against some of the progressive or the extreme left ideas that were earlier doing the rounds, in as much as we saw the Progressive Caucus actually sending about 400 names for Biden consideration, transition teams consideration, and so on. So you do see all of that. But I think I take great heart in seeing the number of qualified, well-seasoned Indian American origin people, because I do believe the Washington adage, personnel is policy. And I think traditional diplomacy route will prove that to our advantage.
Yes, Ambassador Puri, if you are with us, your thoughts on what do you think will change within the United States and in the India-US relationship in the medium term?
Thank you. In my opinion, the most important change is going to be the fact that the United States goes back to its old business of dealing with its allies. This, in my opinion, would add tremendous amount of clout to a do-it-yourself policy when it comes to the greatest global challenge, which is really the rise of China at the moment. In this, I believe India has a vital role to play, and I think India's role will certainly be leveraged both by them, and we too will have an opportunity here in India. Secondly, we look at multilateralism. I think multilateralism will see a revival, and again, India has a role to play in all of this. I therefore see the opportunities from the Biden administration are such that we should try and leverage these opportunities. Of course, we must remember that there will be challenges. And why do I say there will be challenges? Look, the Democrat Party, and President Biden is no exception. They have their own domestic constituencies. And these domestic constituencies very often raise matters which become matters of certain amount of sensitivity among us in India. Human rights, disarmament, I don't know about climate, that too may not be an easy task for us to manage, because the pressures would certainly be on a country like India, which has really miles to go before it can easily decide to try and go into a mitigation mode. But we will do our bit. We've done more than our bit. And I think this is an opportunity time for us, and a time that we should leverage.
Right, yes. Professor Sidhu, as we are watching these live visuals coming to us from the Arlington Cemetery, if I can quickly ask you a quick question about the future trajectory of India-US ties insofar as trade issues are concerned. There was talk about a limited trade deal to be signed, which could not be signed for various reasons. How do you look at the probability of that being signed in Biden's term, number one? Number two, the irritants on the trade front, for instance, the GSP issue, the totalization of social security issue is also pending. H-1B visa is a thorny issue. How do you see issues as immigration, mobility, and visa, shaping up going forward?
They're certainly not going to be easy. And there, because the Biden administration is also going to be keen on going back to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which we saw that there was a move away from. I think they're going to find that Asia has moved on. And in that context, India